Good evening. Welcome to the Buck Stops here. I'm Vishnu Shom. On the program tonight, the International Court of Justice at The Hague rules in favour of India. Kulbhushan Jadhav, the Indian national who Pakistan accuses of espionage, cannot be executed until the court hears a larger case against him, perhaps in August. But the big question is this. It was a military court in Pakistan that had sentenced Jadhav. Will the military in Pakistan accept the verdict of the International Court of Justice, or will they just ignore it and execute Kulbhushan Jadhav? That really is an unanswered question at this stage. What is Pakistan going to do next? That is something that so many, certainly the family of Kulbhushan Jadhav, will be looking out for.
Pakistan shall take all measures at its disposal to ensure that Mr Jadhav is not executed pending the final decision in these proceedings, and shall inform the court of all the measures taken in implementation of the present order. Unanimously decides that until the court has given its final decision, it shall remain seized of the matters which form the subject matter of this order. At this stage, the existence between the parties of a dispute that is capable of falling within the provisions of the Vienna Convention, the court considers that the alleged failure by Pakistan to provide the requisite consular notifications with regard to the arrest and detention of Mr Jadhav, as well as the alleged failure to allow communication and provide access to him, appear to be capable of falling within the scope of the Vienna Convention. Therefore, the court considers that there is no sufficient basis to conclude at this stage that the 2008 agreement prevents it from exercising its jurisdiction under Article 1 of the optional protocol.
It was a packed courtroom and a keenly awaited judgment. For India, a diplomatic win and a life of an Indian national saved for now. The final court order is now awaited. This is Maheshwari Autar for NDTV, The Hague.
All right, well, what happens next? What is Pakistan going to do? Will there be justice for Kulbhushan Jadhav? Is there any way in which we can actually bring him back to this country? Or even if the death sentence doesn't take place, is he going to spend, who knows, perhaps the rest of his life in Pakistan? No clear answers. We're going to be debating this evening. Joining us, Vivek Kajju, former Secretary, External Affairs Ministry. Praveen Swami here with me in the studio. Sushant Sareen, the security expert. GVL Narasimha Rao of the BJP. Satish Manishinde, the well-known advocate, and we'll be joined from Pakistan by Air Marshal retired Shahid Latif, the former Vice Chief of the Pakistan Air Force. I'd like to thank all of you very much for joining us. GVL Narasimha Rao, let me come to you first. August is when this takes place next. India will be hoping that one way or the other, the entire issue, the entire substantive argument that we have against how Pakistan has gone about this business of prosecuting Jadhav will be dealt with at the level of the International Court of Justice. But can the International Court of Justice actually deal with criminal cases in individual countries? A lot of people would say that that is not within the purview of the ICJ. So what can India effectively expect next time around?
No, Vishnu, we have gone to the ICJ. Our petition dated May 8th, I think clearly spells out the kind of relief that India is seeking from our presentation at the ICJ. And at the top of it, the relief we have sought is primarily for immediate suspension and the sentence of death award, which we have got. I think the court ICJ has given a stay until a final decision is made by the ICJ, whatever be the time frame. And they have asked Pakistan to give an assurance to that effect and spell out the measures that the Pakistan government would take to enforce this particular order of the ICJ. So we have got that relief today. The second relief was to get this entire conviction cancelled, annulled, because the entire process adopted, if there was any process at all, is dubious. It was non-transparent. There was no trial. There was no opportunity given to the accused, and consular access was not given. So I think I don't think this would be considered. This should be considered as a normal
and
trial
that is what I'm asking.
in any open society or open country.
So
GVL,
that is exactly what I'm asking.
Conviction, to my mind,
I understand
that conviction should be completely set
sure,
aside on
and
that ground,
that is
because
clearly
it was
what
not a trial
we hope and
in
we
the-
expect.
in the
Based on
legal
our
sense.
central argument that this is an entirely trumped up business that's taken place. Ambassador Karju, in the International Court of Justice, there are those who believe that in August, the best that India may be able to get is guaranteed consular access, all right, to this gentleman, and that while there is a stay at this stage on his execution, August is just a few months later. Or is there a reasonable possibility of India actually winning a case against Pakistan, which may actually result in him coming back to India?
Look, I think today was a day of considerable success, because prima facie the court agreed that it had jurisdiction. Also, it found that India had made a plausible case on merits, and certainly they entirely agree with our plea for the exercise of provisional measures and therefore the stay. Now, our plea, as you rightly said, Vishnu, when the court will finally hear the case in detail in August, will be, as it has been mentioned in our petition, that not only should there be should Pakistan be found wanting and in breach of the Vienna Convention for not allowing consular access to Jadhav, but also that because of the mischief that the lack of consular access has done, the entire process be annulled. Now, let me start by saying I'm not an international legal expert, but as a diplomat of who's had a little experience of these matters, the court, the ICJ, is not an appellate court for exercising criminal jurisdiction.
Precisely.
But certainly, once we get consular access, then we will be aware of the full facts that have taken place. And I think at that stage, we can build a very plausible and good case on behalf of Jadhav within the Pakistani judicial system. Now, some skeptics may say, and I would agree with them, that to expect justice for Jadhav from the Pakistani judicial system, where in a country where the army is predominant, is perhaps hoping for too much.
Okay.
But this is how the international game is played. So I think we'll have to take it step by step and not see the final outcome at this stage. Because when you go to court, there are many
the final outcome is still a ways away. So, Ambassador, I take your point. I want to bring in
our benefit.
Yeah, I want to bring in Praveen as well. We've got a finite period of time. Praveen, we were talking about this before, and I think you would perhaps agree with what the ambassador is saying. That look, the International Court of Justice in August isn't necessarily going to have the ability to give us what we seek.
Absolutely. I mean, look, what judges do is what judges do, and we can't crystal ball gaze here. But we can look at the body of precedent the court has set in the past. And the last big judgment they gave on this was in 2004, when Mexico petitioned the ICJ on behalf of 54 Mexicans on death row in the United States in a case called Avena. And in that case, Mexico argued that because these 54 of its citizens on death row hadn't been given consular access by the United States, their trials had been so vitiated by this that these convictions should be just struck down because they hadn't got good lawyers, they hadn't got adequate representation. And what the ICJ did in that case is they said, well, no, we're not going to ask for these judgments to be struck down, but we want the US judicial system to go back and make a determination about which of these cases the outcome would have changed if they had better lawyers, and then to revisit those cases. The US system, of course, much fairer, much more transparent than the American one, than the Pakistani one. In some of those cases, people did win clemency. In other cases, they were executed. And then sadly, in 2008, the US Supreme Court turned around and said, actually, nothing the ICJ says matters because US domestic law is paramount. So the entire thing collapsed. But anyway, the important point being, I agree with Ambassador Kaju. I don't think the ICJ is going to get into the nitty-gritty of a criminal case. It's probably going to turn around and say the same thing, that you
guarantee consular access,
right, and then go back to some sort of credible judicial forum in Pakistan, and seek justice there.
Satish Manishinde, a credible judicial forum in Pakistan in a case as sensitive as this, a lot of people would say is very unlikely. What is the best case scenario for India? That we have some sort of representation by Indian lawyers in a Pakistani court? Is that at all allowed? Can we reasonably expect, say, an international lawyer to come in and represent Jadhav in a Pakistani court? How do you see it ultimately playing out in a Pakistani court, assuming that the ICJ says that, look, there has to be a free and impartial investigation and trial in this, which is not military, because he's been sentenced by a military court?
See, first of all, one has to see the background of this case. It is the claim of Jadhav, which was made on behalf of him before the International Court of Justice, that he was abducted from Iran and taken to Pakistan, and then he was tried militarily and then sentenced to death. First of all, if there is a question of jurisdiction, of Pakistan having any jurisdiction over Jadhav to try him, that the International Court of Justice will be in a position to decide. Because in a similar matter, where the Italian Marines were facing, a charge of murder in Indian courts, they approached the United Nations Tribunal on Law of Seas, which is now presently seized of the matter, because their claim is that they were, accused of an offence which took place on the high seas and which is not within the territorial jurisdiction of India. So similarly, there are other provisions under the UN Convention by which we can try and persuade the International Court or any other forum in the UN to see that Pakistan does not have jurisdiction over Jadhav, as long as we have enough evidence to prove that Jadhav was abducted from Iran and then taken to Pakistan.
Okay, Ambassador Kaju had a point to make on what you are saying.
India has a consular access.
Yeah, so 1 second, Ambassador Kaju wanted to respond specifically to what you are saying. Go ahead, Ambassador.
I think in the Italian Marines case, the location of the incident was not in dispute. That was a very material factor in that case, and I think our lawyer friend would agree with this. Here, the question which I believe is right, I entirely concur with what the government is saying, that Jadhav was abducted from Iran. But how do we establish that? Now, yes, perhaps once we get consular access to Jadhav, we will be able to then assert that he was, based on what he tells us, kidnapped and abducted. But as of today, I don't know whether the government has in its position any material which will conclusively establish this. Though let me underline again that I believe that he was abducted.
To Jadhav. We are joined by Air Marshal retired Shahid Latif, the former Vice Chief of the Pakistan Air Force. Air Marshal, thank you very much for joining us. You know, point by point, whatever happened in the International Court of Justice went completely against Pakistan. The judge said the dispute is under the Vienna Convention. The Vienna Convention does not exclude people charged with espionage. Pakistan said that this case was not fit for the International Court of Justice. The court has prima facie jurisdiction to entertain the dispute. Pakistan said that that was not the case. Pakistani arguments are not sufficient to deny the rights invoked by India under the Vienna Convention. Pakistan said the opposite. And most, perhaps as significantly, all of this has a binding effect on Pakistan. Therefore, Air Marshal, can one assume that the military authorities in Pakistan will respect the International Court of Justice and go by what the order is, or will they go ahead and execute Kulbhushan Jadhav?
Look, first of all, let me briefly touch, the overall scenario. The court has said that apparently it seems that it is in their jurisdiction. And when you act on behalf of a court, and that too we are talking about International Court of Justice, I don't think that the court should base its proceedings on an apparent matter. To begin with, one has to be very sure that yes, it is in their
court did it in provisional for exercise of provisional measures. I mean, please don't confuse.
One second, Ambassador, let him make his point.
Know your law.
Ambassador Kachoo, let him make his point. Let's hear the point. Yes.
Can I please give my point?
Yes, sir. Go ahead. Go ahead, Air Marshal. Go ahead.
All right. So that's my number 1 point. Number 2 point is whatever has happened so far is only interim. It has not reached a conclusive stage. It is yet to proceed further. And Pakistan has all the opportunity. If we think that we have not been able to convince the court and we have not been able to present ourselves forcefully, we have all the time. The matter is very clear. And by the way, in the past, cases pertaining to America, to Germany, when the International Court of Justice ordered them to do something, they did not do it. So there are examples. And
okay, so Air Marshal, the bottom line,
interest here,
bottom line is that Pakistan may well consider a situation when they will reject the International Court of Justice, toss it aside, despite the fact that you're signatories to the Vienna Convention, you are a party to the International Court of Justice as per your standing in the United Nations, and do what you want for your narrow constituency. That's what you're essentially saying.
No, we are signatory to Vienna Convention, but our interpretation is different.
But the judges ruled.
Denied it.
15 judges have ruled, sir.
The court
15
is still
judges.
skeptical and has said
15 judges, sir. Not just the presiding judge. 15 judges have ruled against you. It was a unanimous verdict.
I am saying that they have said it in as many words that they think that the cases of espionage, they fall in the jurisdiction of the court, and actually they have talked about not really espionage, they have talked about, being a spy. Our case is a little different. It's not only spying, it is terrorism, and it is very serious in our perception.
Well, one would assume it's serious in everybody's perception. Air Marshal, I'm going to try and come back to you if I have a moment, but I want to go across to Sushant Sareen, who's been waiting very, very patiently. Mr. Sareen, in a situation like this, ultimately it's going to go back into the court. One doesn't know if the International Court of Justice can give India the justice that we seek. It may, if Pakistan appeals, they can even go to the United Nations Security Council. They have an ally in China. Things may not work out necessarily for us despite today's victory. Under such circumstances, do you believe that some sort of track 2 between India and Pakistan may be the only way forward? Some sort of exchange of detainees might be possible. The Director Generals of Military Operations speak all the time. They speak once a week. Is that an avenue that realistically needs to be pursued? Sushant Sareen.
I think eventually that's what is going to lead to some kind of a solution. See, look, just by the merits of the case, I think the kind of sweeping one-sided judgment which has come out clearly suggests that the kind of case that the Pakistanis were making, whether on jurisdiction or whether on this cock and bull story that he was a terrorist and all of that, obviously the courts didn't buy it. And I find it a strange logic to say that the courts apparently saw something and they don't rule on what is apparent. Then I don't know what they rule on. Apparently they saw a miscarriage of justice taking place, and that is why they stepped in. Now, it would be speculative to say how this case is going to process. But I think it is important for the Pakistanis to not be delusional and think that they are like the United States. I think the United States is the United States, and it can do many things and get away with it. Pakistan is Pakistan, and it can't do many things and get away with it. So I think that level of realism needs to be there. With the kind of judgment which has come out, and assuming that the next stage also goes in India's favor if the merits of the case are anything to go by, and perhaps the next stage would be that, as Praveen very correctly said, that not a military court but a normal court in which the standards of evidence, not a kangaroo court which is a summary trial, but a normal criminal court where you try a person with the normal standards of evidence. Perhaps that could go in favor of Jadhav or it could go against it. But let us say that that is the way it proceeds. I think the important point is going to be that after the ICJ judgment, the moral force is on the case which India was pleading, and the Pakistanis don't have much of a moral case. Now, will the Pakistanis actually be brave enough or silly enough or stupid enough to defy the ICJ and say, okay, fine, we are going to execute him?
Yep.
Because the implication of that, both the diplomatic implication of Pakistan's image in the rest of the world, as well as the consequences of that kind of a precipitate action on relations between India and Pakistan, I think they'll have to factor that in.
Okay.
So, while there is likely to be all sorts of grandstanding on the Pakistani side, there's going to be a lot of chest thumping that we will defy everything. But I think ultimately what they will do is that even if they, the next stages of appeal of Jadhav go against him, I don't see an execution happening anytime soon or at all. And ultimately, as you kind of alluded in your question, ultimately it will be some kind of an exchange, some kind of a back channel which will come into play. And I think that is how this matter is going to settle down.
Okay,
I don't
GVL
see
Narasimha I want to come
anything
across to you
more
next.
happening at this point in time.
Okay, GVL, I just last word from you. The fact is, today India has won a very major diplomatic victory. It's won a very major legal victory. And there was this entire process that was happening. In the past, by and large, whenever there have been disputes between India and Pakistan, these disputes have not necessarily gone to the International Court of Justice. It happened in 1999, I believe, the last time around, when we shot down one of their maritime reconnaissance aircraft which had crossed over into Gujarati airspace. But this time around, we have chosen this avenue and we have been very successful. Have we proven a larger point internationally, and to that end, is that something perhaps we need to be talking more about? How the world will now be looking at Pakistan, because the judge has said exactly what we've been arguing for a long time.
No, Vishnu, the matter had been taken to the ICJ because this is not a bilateral issue that involves only India and Pakistan. Pakistan was in violation of not conforming to the operational protocol under the Vienna Convention, and which is a multilateral agreement. It's not a India-Pakistan bilateral agreement. So certainly the point was on not providing consular access, and therefore the entire trial, a sham trial that was carried out, cannot really have any relevance. So we asked for the quashing of the trial because quashing of the sentence, annulling of the sentence, because the due process, legal procedures were not followed and consular access was not given, and therefore, and he already suffered in the very first place, even in the judgment which the president of ICJ read out. I think the very circumstances of arrest of Mr. Jadhav itself are a point of dispute. In fact, when the court hears the matter, before a final decision is arrived at, I think all this will possibly form a part of the presentation before the court. I think he was abducted from Iran, then he was actually sold to ISI, and the entire attempt, the entire script that Pakistan followed, and you had Sartaaj Aziz telling members of Senate 9 months after he was abducted that we have no evidence of he being a spy. We don't have anything on record. And now for Pakistan suddenly to come up in April and say he is a terrorist, this seems like a script.
It seems to be trumped up. That's what the Attorney General said.
It will not convince anybody in the world.
So bottom line, that he said the whole world is now going to see that this was a charade, it was a bogus stand by Pakistan. We're running out of time. I'd like to thank all of you very much for joining us. As far as Kulbhushan Jadhav is concerned, his family, well, he is alive today, and hopefully one way or the other we'll be able to bring him back, but it's going to be a long process. Will there be a resolution outside the court? I'd like to thank all of you very much for being with us. Well, we're going to quickly move on now to another one of our big stories. It's a big day for the Indian Army, which has acquired a new weapon system from the United States. It's an artillery gun. It is, in fact, the first time in 3 decades since the Bofors saga that India has acquired a new artillery gun system. Well, it is for the first time in 30 years that the Indian Army has received 2 brand new artillery gun systems. Now, this is just, these are in fact 2 M777 ultralight howitzers which arrived in India, and they are a part of an order for 145 guns which India sealed in a government-to-government deal with the United States for $700 million. Earlier this month, the Indian company Larsen & Toubro bagged a 4,500 crore rupee deal with the South Korean company Hanwha Tech to assemble 100 units of 155mm 52 caliber K9 Vajra T self-propelled howitzers. It's one among many steps India is taking. Significantly, some of the most advanced artillery guns being acquired by the Army are the designed and made in India advanced towed artillery gun system that you see here. It's called ATAGS. It was showcased for the first time during this year's Republic Day parade. Now, why is this all happening now? Why has it not happened for so many years? Well, in the 80s, India had acquired 410 Bofors field howitzer guns from Sweden in a $1.4 billion contract. The deal was mired in controversy after reports that the Swedish company had paid nearly $10 million in kickbacks to top Indian politicians. Ironically, a modernized and significantly improved variant of the Bofors FHBO2 gun is finally being built by the Ordnance Factory Board after the old designs were belatedly pulled out, dusted and put to manufacture. That, in fact, is this gun. It's called the Dhanush.